Hey, what's going on? New article for you today for this week. We're going to talk a little bit about Harriet Tubman. We mentioned her a couple weeks ago because of the 20 possibly being switched from Andrew Jackson to Harriet Tubman. So I thought, why don't we take a week and talk about Harriet Tubman, maybe a new addition to our money. I think the first time in my life, if it happens, somebody new on a bill. There have been a couple coins in my lifetime, but this, I'm getting pretty old, so this is a big thing. Hopefully this happens sooner than later. But you can see this article. It's called Harriet Tubman Gets a New Home Along the Underground Railroad. So really quickly, Underground Railroad, if you don't know, when slavery still existed in this country, towards the end of that, there were people who were either abolitionists, which means they wanted slavery to end. They wanted to abolish it, abolitionists, or maybe they were former slaves. And of course, they were still abolitionists too, but somehow they had gotten their freedom in the North, moved to the North, got their freedom. And then there were some people that were just, not ever slaves, white people that just really believed that, slavery should end, and they wanted to do everything they could to stop it. So this Underground Railroad, I know it sounds like a railroad, and it's not underground. Like, it's not under the ground. It's underground as in secret. So sometimes something that's underground is secret. So maybe there's, like, at school, I don't think we have any. We might have an underground club, that secretly hates all the teachers, or maybe just me. Maybe there's a secret club, an underground club where you just hate me. Nobody knows about it except the people in the club. It's an underground club. I think you could have like an underground like nightclub. Maybe it's like an illegal nightclub where they don't have like the proper permits or something, but everybody knows to meet there. So underground can mean secret. And in this case, it does. And railroad was basically, okay, so Harriet Tubman was a conductor of this railroad. And then, like a conductor on a train, she was responsible for getting slaves from the South, where they didn't have any freedom. Hopefully, the last stop on the Underground Railroad was up in Canada. So there are all these stops along the Underground Railroad, and there's actually a stop in Portland. And maybe I'll go down there one day and like just film where it is. It's right in the old port. There's a little marker on the building that says this was once, I think it says a stop on the Underground Railroad. So you know how close we are to Canada. It would probably, one of the last stops. And remember, people were walking this entire time. So we're still a long ways away from Canada if you're in Portland. But you're definitely further away from somewhere like Alabama or Louisiana or Maryland. That was a more likely place that slaves would come from, somewhere more towards the border between free states and slave states. So like Maryland. And in this article, we're actually going to talk about Maryland. So it was much easier to escape from Maryland than it is from Louisiana, just because there's so much of the path that you have to go through that's still slave territory, or slave states. All right, so let's take a look at this here. Harriet Tubman gets a new home along the Underground Railroad, and you can see here are some pictures of her. This looks very similar to the one that we read about for the 20. I'm not sure if they'll use that picture for the 20, but it's a pretty decent picture. At the new Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad Visitor Center, children can earn trading cards and a badge at the park. I remember when my own children were younger, we went to Washington, D.C., and they earned a badge. I think they were a little bit too old to really care about that badge, but I mean, if you're like 2, 3, 4, that badge could be pretty sweet. If you're like 9 or 10, you're like, all right. And I think they lost them right after we left, but they had a badge for a couple seconds. Washington, D.C. is a pretty cool place if you've never been. If Harriet Tubman were to magically reappear in Dorchester County on Maryland's eastern shore, she might think she had time traveled back to her childhood. The area's grassy marshes, sparkling rivers, and flat farmland look much as they did when she lived there in the early 1800s. She knew these fields and waterways well, both as a child born into slavery as Artemita Minty Ross, and as a woman who married and changed her name to Harriet Tubman. She escaped to freedom at age 27 and risked capture and even death by returning to the area a dozen or more times to assist about 70 others, including her parents and brothers, in making their own escapes. They used a secret network of people and places called the Underground Railroad. Tubman was one of its most famous conductors. She earned the biblical nickname Moses for freeing her people. So that's one thing that we always have to keep in mind, that Harriet Tubman, she did earn her freedom. I mean, she should have been born with that freedom, but different times back then. So she was able to become a freed former slave, and yet she kept going back, as the article said, risking her life, risking recapture. Because, I mean, let's face it, back then, I mean, there weren't exactly clear papers. It would be, I mean, a slave owner would love to get a free slave. Just a free, like, oh, hey, yeah, you're my slave now. So Harriet Tubman, I mean, yeah, she earned her freedom, but it was really sketchy freedom. I mean, it could be lost at any time. And this isn't a history. We're not going to talk about this history in class, but just like really quickly, there was this thing called the Dred Scott decision. You probably hear about it in high school, Dred Scott, which made a law that even if a slave had escaped to the North to get their freedom, people from the South could go look for them. There was a whole business of like finding slaves, getting reward. I mean, slaves were basically property, right? Just like the animals on the farm or the tools on the farm. That's the way slaves were looked at. And, who's to say that when these, we call them bounty hunters, right now you might have you ever repo people, if your truck or car gets repossessed, like if you can't pay your bills to the bank on your car that you're paying for, most people take out loans. Well, a repo person could come and take your car. It's a dangerous work. And it was a lot like your Dog the Bounty Hunter. If anybody's ever seen that show from a long time ago, it still plays on some TV station. I've seen it recently. But that was a business. People would go looking for slaves. So what? They get it wrong. Oh, well, I'm still going to get my money, and the slave owner is going to get somebody else to work for them. So papers were lost, papers were destroyed. It was super sketchy. Maybe we'll talk more about that later on, but she was definitely risking her freedom by going back there. But because of the Dred Scott decision, it was a court case that was heard by the Supreme Court, and it was perfectly legal if somebody escaped to the North to bring them back to the South. Maybe they were a free person the whole time. Maybe there was a little mix-up. Well, guess what? People are still getting paid. If you were black in this country, North or South, in the 1800s, do you think you had as much rights as people who were white? No. The law really did not care that much. It's like, your family and friends, hey, no, they're free. Like, well, we have papers that say otherwise. It was just a horrible time. The next one, we are on this next paragraph here. That much about Tubman is pretty well known, but other parts of her impressive long life, she lived into her 90s, are not. A visitor center opening this weekend in Dorchester County aims to give a fuller picture of this remarkable woman. Can I back out of this so we can see the whole picture? Maybe. Yeah, see, a dude is looking at this would be called a bust, by the way, B-U-S-T, like a statue of like the upper body pretty much. That's a bust. Does it say bust here? No. A bronze statue of Harriet Tubman in the new visitor center. Sculptor Brendan O'Neill said he wanted his bust, there you go, I thought it was there, of the historic figure to show Tubman's strength and grit. So this right here, it would not be the bust, but from here on up, we would call that a bust. A bust. You know, like if something is broken, but totally not. I mean, I guess if it helps you think, you know, maybe the statue broke and you only have the top part, it busted, the top part is a bust. What's this down here? Did they just not pick up? What is that? It looks like they opened a box and didn't even bother picking up the trash. Look at that. Look at trash all over. It looks like they're just maybe getting things ready. The first item visitors will see is a bronze bust of Tubman mounted on a column. It shows how tall or short she was, 5 feet. So, what do you think? Is that tall, 5 feet, or is that short? Some people, little babies, that might be really tall. Like, wow, she was really tall. To most adults and teenagers, 5 feet, probably a little shorter than normal. But hey, shows, doesn't matter your height, you can get things done. Sculptor Brandon O'Neill was putting the bust in place last week. He said he wanted to show the strength and grit Tubman displayed despite her small frame. Preteen visitors may feel it as if they face her eye to eye. Statues and exhibits in the 2 main halls round out Tubman's life story. One of 9 children, she was taken from her mother at age 6 and forced to work. One statue shows her hunting muskrats, valuable for food and fur. Another honors her Civil War service as a cook, nurse, scout, and spy for the Union. During an 1863 raid in South Carolina, Tubman helped free more than 700 slaves. In her later years, she opened a home for the elderly on land she owned in New York. And she worked for women's rights as well as for minorities and the disabled. I think of Harriet Tubman as a normal person who did extraordinary things, said Angela Crenshaw, assistant manager of the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad State Park. That's a mouthful. Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad State Park, home to the new visitor center. Tubman never learned to read or write. She suffered all of her life from a severe head injury she received as a girl. She had a $100 reward placed on her, yet returned time after time to Maryland to help more slaves escape. Well, I am curious, how did she receive that head injury? May have to do a little digging. She just never quit, said historian Beth Parnencia of the National Park Service. She thinks Tubman's message for kids is in seeing how a person can truly live their ideals no matter what their circumstances are. By doing what's right, everybody can change the world. Tubman's life proves that. Her tombstone sums it up best. It reads, "Servant of God. Well done." Harriet Tubman alongside her family and neighbors in 1887 at her home in Auburn, New York. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. So which one is Tubman? Is that Harriet Tubman? Or is that Harriet Tubman? 1887. When was she born? I can't remember. She lived into her 90s, so it is quite possible that. Let me see. Harriet Tubman alongside her family and neighbors. I don't know. Does that look like her? Or does that look like her? I'm confused. If you figure out which one is Harriet Tubman, please let me know. All right. I hope you've enjoyed this. We will do more work with Harriet Tubman, that's for sure.